So good evening and welcome to this live Ask Me Anything About Property Investing with myself, Saj Hussain. I have my lovely 13-year-old assistants in the background managing the tech today, so hopefully it will go well. So this is an opportunity for you to have your property investing questions answered. I'm here for about half an hour, answering whatever questions I possibly can. I don't know everything there is to know about property, but I'm certainly very knowledgeable and very experienced when it comes to property investing, and happy to share that knowledge and experience with you to ultimately help you get further faster in your property investing journey. So I will start off in a moment with a question or two that I've got left over from last week that I can still find in my inbox, and I'll answer those. And in the meantime, if you've got any questions that you'd like me to answer, please feel free to put them in the comment section. They'll flash up on this screen over here, and I'll do my very best to get through those. So I'm committing to do these sessions every Monday at 8:30 p.m. It's something I was doing previously before COVID and lockdown happened. Started them again last week. And many of the questions started appearing towards the end. So I'd encourage you, if you've got a question, put it in nice and early into the comment section so I can see it, and I'll go through it in that order and start answering the questions in that way. And of course, if there's not many questions to answer, we'll all get off early and we'll finish early for the session. So I'm here for you, so it's important that you're putting your questions in the comment section. And I'm broadcasting live on various different platforms, on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn as well. So whichever platform you're watching it on, just pop a question in the comment section. So first of all, I'll start with the question I had on Facebook last week, which I was unable to answer, which is from Omar Hanid in London. And he's saying, I'm from London, I have an investment property. Is it best to have it on interest-only mortgage or repayment mortgage? Now, first of all, I just need to caveat, I'm not a mortgage advisor. I'm just sharing my knowledge and experience with you. It's really important to speak to a mortgage advisor before you make any decisions around your mortgage. But generally speaking, investors tend to have mortgages that are interest only as opposed to repayment. And the reason has been that traditionally the interest element is seen as a cost. So let's say, for example, you've got a rent income on a property of say £1,000, and you've got a mortgage payment of say £600. Then the £400 left over minus some other costs, that's essentially the profit that you're making on that particular property. So the £600 is offset. Oh, just 1 second. I think my camera's moved. Let's just get that back on track. I think we're good to go. So the £600 is offset as a cost. Let's say it was a repayment mortgage, and the repayment mortgage was the 600 interest plus a couple of hundred on top to make it repayment. Let's say it's an £800 mortgage. Ultimately, you're only ending up with, say, about £200 in your pocket in that particular example. Now, although you're paying £800 out, you can't offset the £800 as a cost as the expenses, because £200 is used to repay your capital. So not only are you paying more out and not able to offset it on your expenses either at the same time, not an ideal situation. Hence why most people go interest only. Now, the other thing is, over the last few years, the taxation rules have changed quite significantly, which means that in our personal names, we can no longer offset that element of £600 that we've had for the interest part of the mortgage. But this doesn't apply to companies or corporations, which is why now many people tend to buy and invest in property through limited companies, because they can still offset the interest element as a cost on that particular transaction. So I hope that helps, and I hope that makes sense, Omar. So let me see what other questions we've got here coming up. We've got a question here. Yeah, so let's just click this one. This is from T. So T is just a statement as opposed to a question. Do you want to read it?
Hi, Saj. Thank you for continuously educating us. Much appreciated.
Thank you, T. Thank you, T, for that comment. Let me see if we've got a question down here. So we've got a question here. This is from Massa. Do you want to read this one? This is on YouTube.
Is it possible to get a mortgage as a first-time buyer in order to buy HMO?
Another great mortgage question. I think you will certainly find it much more difficult if you're looking to buy a HMO when you're a first-time buyer, because ultimately you don't have the experience of being a landlord, and a HMO is considered something that's for those that are a little bit more experienced. Now, it doesn't mean it can't be done. It may be that needs to be somebody else on the mortgage with you, another applicant, somebody that's more experienced. Or, for example, what we were talking about earlier on, if you set it up as a limited company that's going to purchase the property, you might be the director and the primary shareholder, but you might also have somebody that has a minor interest in that company that has experience in HMOs, and that could help you that way as well. So hope that answers your question there, Massa. So we've got another question here, Tahibut. What's the question? Do you want to read that, honey?
What do you think about the news regarding increase of the threshold of stamp duty to 5K? I mean 500K.
Yeah, so I've only heard little snippets of this today. So the Chancellor's talking about changing stamp duty and raising the threshold. It was currently, I think it's about 125, 150,000, raising it up to possibly 500,000. So which would mean there'd be no stamp duty to pay at that level. As I said, I've only caught a snippet of this today. I've been on calls all today. Quite often on Mondays, I tend to do my mentoring and support calls, so I literally have back-to-back calls. And I've just got off a call with my group, my inner circle group, my mentoring group, and we were just talking about this briefly there. And I hadn't really had time to grasp it from the news anywhere else. But from my understanding is that if this threshold raises, I think the Chancellor doing an announcement on Wednesday, so we might hear more about these things on Wednesday. And on the surface of it, sounds like it's great news. However, we need to look at the detail of how it's going to work. I suspect for property investors, it's not going to apply. This is really going to be for those that are purchasing a home. However, if you may have heard me talk about this before, I think the way the economy is moving right now, it's very likely that we'll have a crash in the property market later this year, possibly towards the end of the year, particularly as the government support stops and starts to fade off. Things like the furlough schemes. And it's great that a lot of businesses now opened up over the last few days. But I suspect there'll be some people that are on the furlough scheme at the moment that may not necessarily have a job that they're going to be going back to, although they've been supported right now by the government. But when the support stops, there'll be no job for them to go back to. Unemployment numbers may start to increase. And as unemployment numbers start to increase, it will have a real impact on house prices, because obviously it affects people's affordability, and confidence in the market is also affected as well. And the confidence in the market, or the market sentiment, has a big impact in terms of the house prices and the way they are going. Now, there are ways that the government could steer that off and prevent a crash from happening. There's a few things that they can do in the property market. One of the primary ones is that they could reduce stamp duty, i.e. this, and that encourages the movement and the purchasing of property. They could also relax some planning rules, which of course there's talk of as well happening, and certain PD rights come into place. And they can put some incentives in place for first-time buyers, and that stimulates the market at the bottom of the market, and it starts having a knock-on effect all the way up. First-time buyers, or the entry-level properties, are generally purchased by the first-time buyers, people buying their first home, or investors buying those properties to turn them into buy-to-lets. Now, if the incentives aren't necessarily there for the investors, but they are for the homeowners, people buying their first property as a home, as there's more people at that level in the market, other people start moving up in the market as well. So, for example, somebody buying their first home off somebody who's already an occupant, an owner of that property, they'll be moving up to, say, the next price bracket, and the property that they're purchasing will probably be somebody who's moving up to the next price bracket as well. So you see the knock-on effect it has on the market, and it kind of stimulates the whole market. So these few things by the government could completely change the likelihood of there being a property crash. So I'd say it's really interesting times, and I think this is an interesting bit of news. Some of the details yet still to come through. We'll see how that works. But I think it's certainly a good thing for the property market. So let's see, we've got starting to get quite a few questions now. Let's see if we can grab another one here. So this one's on Facebook from Lorraine. Do you want to read this one?
I'm planning a flip. What is the best way to purchase to plan for a capital gains tax, please?
Okay, so Lorraine, great question. If you're purchasing a property that you'll be looking to sell on, and capital gains, if it's in your personal name, then you have capital gains to pay on that particular gain that you make on the sale of the property. But of course, you have a capital gains allowance each year, and maybe if you have a partner, they'll also have an allowance. So if the two of you purchase together, that could be a good figure. I can't remember the exact amount of the allowance, about 11,000 something. So if two of you, maybe £22,000 allowance potentially there in any one tax year. So that's the that's a thing to remember. There obviously depends on how much profit you're going to make within this flip. Now, alternatively, if you purchased it in a company name, there'll be no capital gains tax to pay, but there'll be corporation tax because you'll be making money in terms of a profit within that company. And now the taxation may work out differently. It might work out that it's actually better if you buy in the company. But ultimately, you also have to remember, how are you going to get the money out of the company? So you don't want to fall into a trap where it's double taxation. You're paying corporation tax and maybe you're paying income tax as well to get the money out of the company. If the money is going to stay in the company and you're going to purchase another property, then of course it may be better to explore it in that way. Look at it, purchase it within the company. So I think it's really important when you are early in your property journey that you get good financial advice in terms of people that are guiding you from finance products that you're using, but also a good accountant as well that can guide you to make sure that, you know, when you're making money, you ultimately keeping more of it in your pocket as opposed to paying more of it in tax. And not that paying tax is a bad thing. Yes, of course, we all need to pay tax, and that's what keeps the country moving forward. But you can pay tax in an efficient way as well. It's about utilizing all the benefits that are there for you within the taxation system. And of course, making sure you've got a good legal bod on your side as well in your team. This is a few people I think it's really important that I've got in your team to help you. And of course, people have already done the things that you want to do. Getting some guidance and advice from them always going to make things easier for you. So Lorraine, I hope that helps. So let's so next one here. This one's from Ken on YouTube. So do you want to read this one?
If you are a new investor, would you start a limited company? If so, what are the benefits? Hoping to do a BRRR.
So Ken's really talking about purchasing a property that you're refurbishing and refinancing. So you're keeping the property and building up a portfolio of properties. So you're adding value and remortgaging. So actually this ties up nicely with the two questions that we've just covered. The first one about purchasing in a limited company so you can offset the interest that you'll have on the mortgages. So I think that's the benefit of doing that there. And of course, if you're going to keep the profits within a company, i.e. you're building up a portfolio, then it still seems to make more sense to do that within a company. And of course, taxation is one of those complex areas and everybody's circumstances are different. So it's important that you're getting good advice from somebody before you make those commitments and decisions. Remember, I'm not a qualified accountant, financial advisor, solicitor. I'm just sharing my knowledge and experience I have in property investing with you. I can always connect you with a good property tax accountant. Just ping me a message and I'm happy to share some contact details with you. So where are we? Oops. So we've got this one here. So this one's from Joanne on LinkedIn.
Hi, when you do a lease option and spend £25,000 for 6 months, question 1, what security would I have that the vendor will not pull out deal? Question 2, if agree a purchase price in 6 months, mortgage company say it now, not worth that much, what should we do?
Okay, Joanne, some really good questions there. And I think lease options is a great strategy. But of course, when it comes to strategies, and you may have heard me talking about this before, it's about using the right strategy at the right time within the property cycle, and also depending on where you are within the country geographically, it can have an impact on which strategies work better at what moment in time. And I think the market is now changing where lease options will become more prevalent once again, as they were probably about 10, 12 years ago. That's when I've done a lot of my lease option deals at that time. And so the questions that you're talking about, so £25,000 you put into a transaction, you've put it into a lease option for 6 months, what security you have? Well, ultimately you have very little security other than the contracts and the documents that you've put into place. What I mean by that is when you're doing a lease option, effectively you're leasing somebody else's property, i.e. you're renting somebody else's property with a right to buy. The two attached together essentially create a lease option. So it's somebody else's property. You're putting the money into that property, i.e. renovating it, improving it, lifting its value. You control that property, but you don't actually own it. Now, hopefully you'll have very good paperwork and using good solicitors to do this. I would only use solicitors who understand and experience, have experience of these type of transactions, so that they're done correctly. And again, if you reach out to me, send me a private message, I can send you a list of solicitors that I've personally worked with for lease options that I can recommend you go and speak to. Now, you should have some paperwork in place that will mean that your interests are protected, but it doesn't mean that the seller can't be difficult and be awkward with you just because they've signed the contracts. Now, hopefully, the transaction will work well. But if the seller started becoming very difficult with you and you had a problem with them in terms of signing documents or getting the thing completed, then yes, you could struggle and you don't really have a huge amount of security. Your option then is litigation, i.e. using the solicitors to fight it and enforce the contract. But then how much is that going to cost? That will probably cost way beyond £25,000. In the past, when I've done lease options, and I did lots of them, I've probably 2 occasions I've lost money on them. One, I walked away, and one got pulled under my feet, which was my own fault in terms of how I'd structured it. But ultimately, I've made sufficient amount of money on other deals not to worry about the 2 that got messed up. But of course, if you're putting £25,000 into a property, that's a lot of money, and you don't want to be talking about walking away from that transaction as well. Now, you can do something that's a little bit different structure-wise, which is an exchange with a delayed completion, or sometimes called EDCs or long stops, which effectively you're exchanging contracts with an elongated period for when you're going to complete on it. So how are the 2 transactions different, a lease option and a delayed completion? Well, the real difference is on a lease option, you've got the right to be able to purchase that property, but you are not obligated to buy it. Whereas on a delayed completion, you actually have committed and you've exchanged contracts and you are obligated to purchase it, which makes it a little bit more watertight. But of course, there's other implications such as stamp duty, end values. If you're going to do a purchase based on a mortgage, you can have some complications there as well, because you've set the price in stone at that moment in time. And if you've spent money, you've improved the value, you can't change the final price in terms of what that transaction is going to complete at. So without getting into too many nuts and bolts of these type of transactions, and trying to keep it high level for you, so you can make it more solid by changing the type of transaction that you're doing. Of course, you can put some obligations on the vendor, the seller of the property, that if they back out or mess out, that they owe you this money. But remember, you've got to legally try and enforce it to get that money. The second part of your question is, if you agree a purchase price and in 6 months the mortgage company say it's now not worth that much, what can you do? So what, if I've understood correctly, what you're saying is if you spend £25,000 on their property and you improve the value, however, when you come to do, say, the purchase, the completion of that transaction, and the bank's surveyor comes out and they disagree with the figure that you think it's worth, and it's worth less what you're able to do, well, ultimately it's going to be worth what someone's prepared to pay for it. And what a surveyor does, it comes and puts their professional opinion on what they think it's worth and whether it's good security for the lender. So remember, when you apply for a mortgage and you pay for that survey is not really for you. That survey is for the bank to protect them and their interest. That's what that survey is ultimately for. So if they're effectively what we call down value it, and it means it's not figure that we were expecting and it's come out at a lower figure, then you are a little bit stuck in that situation. But remember, you aren't obligated to buy if you're in a lease option structure. You could walk away from that transaction. And what does that mean? Well, it means that you allow your contract to expire, your lease would expire, your right to buy would expire, the property will revert back to the owner. Where does that leave the owner? Well, first of all, it's really important to think about what it is that you told them from the offset when you started this transaction. If you would give them commitment that you were going to purchase this property, whether it's contractual or not, I believe morally it's important that you still complete on that transaction, because that's what you've said to them that you're going to do, even though contractually you don't have to do that. But then you've spent £25,000 potentially on their property and improved the value of the property. They've got a better property. So if it did come to that and you had to return it to them, you'd be out of pocket of the 25,000 you've spent, but they're not necessarily going to be in a worse position than they were when you took the property on. So it sounds like there's a few things there you need to think about and consider before you go ahead with that. If there's anything else I can help with, Joanna, because I know we've worked together a little bit before, just ping me a message and I'll try and add some more value to that for you. So we've got quite a lot of questions. How are we doing for time? We're going to be on for about another 10 minutes, so let's try and pick out a couple more. So this next question is by T. Do you want to read this one on YouTube?
I hear further up north, the cheaper the prices, but how do I determine which area to buy in? What are the 3 to 5 things to focus on?
So T, a very good question, and I was having this conversation with somebody just earlier today, somebody working overseas. We had a call about them investing in the UK, not necessarily with me, because it's not something I do. I don't offer a sourcing service, but they were talking about working with other sources and finding properties, particularly in the northeast, because the properties tend to be cheaper. But we have to think about the factors of why the properties are cheaper there. Often the affordability isn't there, employment levels might be low, and in some areas, yes, you can buy a cheap property, but the only other buyer of that property would be another investor. So what I mean by that, if you ever need to come to sell that property, it may be in an area where there aren't many owner-occupiers. That means that people that are in the properties aren't necessarily owners, they're mostly renters. So the only other person that is likely to purchase that property from you is another investor who may also be looking for a bit of a deal. And you can look at the market beforehand, like Rightmove. You can check how many transactions have happened within that postcode over the last year, 2 years. Is it an active market? Is it one where there's lots of movement, or is it one that isn't very much movement? Now, it could be that you're quite comfortable doing this on a yield basis. What that means is that, let's say you're purchasing, keeping the numbers simple, let's say you're purchasing a house for £50,000 and you're getting £500 a month income on that particular property. So £500 over a year, that's £6,000. So you're getting £6,000 a year on a £50,000 investment. Hey, that's a fairly decent yield, and it may be that you're quite happy with that. Of course, sometimes there's added risks with the type of tenants that you might have in a property like that. Your voids also might be higher, your maintenance might be higher as well in that particular property, so the net yields might get affected. So I would be thinking about ultimately why is it you want to do this. If you're doing it to create a reasonable yield, you need to look at the true net yield that you're actually going to end up with, how much return you're going to get on your money. Ultimately, what I'm interested in is a return on capital employed. So what return am I going to get with the money that's tied up in that particular transaction? So employment in the area, who are the major employers? Are there any big changes happening? A lot of the employment up in the northeast can be big, heavy industry, manufacturing, and some of that is now starting to disappear. It isn't necessarily there. What alternative employment is there in the area? Is there a lots of investment happening into infrastructure in those towns and cities as well? Otherwise, really, you're limited to what's already there. Your tenants are going to be the demographics that are in that area, and there's lots of websites you can use just to check the demographics and the type of people that live in a postcode without even leaving the comfort of your home. Check My File have one. I think it's checkmyfile.com/postcode or something like that. You can probably Google it, check my area. And if you put the postcode in there, it'll tell you about the type of people that live in the area, the level of unemployment, the crime rate, also whether there's people in financial difficulty in that area as well. It gives you really good data, because that data comes from marketing companies who collect the data, use it for marketing products and services to people. So Tia Holber gives you a few ideas there. So let's see. So we've got a question here on YouTube from Massa.
Is the council in Birmingham going ahead with their city-wide article for proposal?
Yeah, so Massa, this has now already happened. It happened on the 8th of June last month, 2020. So Birmingham now is officially an Article 4 area. What that ultimately means is prior to the 8th of June, we could have taken a property in parts of the city that weren't already Article 4. And what we could do with those properties is, under permitted development rights, we could take a family house, which is a planning classification of C3, to turn it into a HMO for up to 6 people, unrelated people living in that house, change its classification to a C4. So all that was done under permitted development. There was no planning approval required. But once a town or city becomes Article 4, what it means is the local authority have removed that specific permitted development right. So now you can no longer take a house that's C3 and change it into C4 without first applying for a full planning application and waiting to get that approved. And I suspect in Birmingham that's probably not going to be so easy. At the moment, it's still quite new. It's only just happened, so time will tell. And I think one of the reasons Birmingham wanted to introduce Article 4 is because they want to control the amount of HMOs that are in the area, just get a grasp of the full market, and then time will tell whether they will be lenient on allowing more HMOs. Personally, I think what will happen is the areas where there's a lot of HMOs already, you know, the likes of Edgbaston, Harborne, Erdington, Selly Oak, these type of areas, it will probably be very difficult to get more HMOs approved in those areas. And some of the other areas where there's very few HMOs, I suspect they'll be more lenient on allowing you to create a HMO there. But then, of course, you have to remember the reason some of these areas, you know, your Edgbastons and etc., are quite established with HMOs is it's self-fulfilling in the sense that lots of people go to that area looking for rooms, so you have a constant demand for rooms. But if you go out into the outer Hebrides of Birmingham to some place where there's no HMO there, and you get planning approval for one because the council are happy to approve it because there isn't any others there, but it may be very limited demand as well. So of course that can impact your ability in terms of running that property properly. So I'd say it's really important that you do your research on the areas before you make a move into purchasing a HMO in an area which is not traditionally known for HMOs in Birmingham. So I hope that answers your question, Massa. Let's see, we've got quite a few questions. I'll try and pick one or two more for people maybe I haven't answered questions for previously. So what's this? So Rita on YouTube is just saying, thank you for sharing your guidance, generosity. Rita, I really enjoy doing this. When I started investing in property nearly 15 years ago now, there's a lot of people that are very helpful, and even people that are potentially my competitors in Birmingham that are really supportive and help me on my journey. And it had a really positive impact on me, because prior to that, when I used to run an IT company, we weren't so generous with our knowledge. We used to hold it close to our chest because that's what we got paid for. And I was just surprised at how abundant people were in property, and it completely changed my mindset. So I'm more than happy to spend time and help other people progress in their property journey as well. So thank you for that, Rita. So let's see, what else have we got here? We've got some interesting one here from Ghost. Asian lives matter, doggy doggy yum yum. So no idea what that means, but thank you anyway. So Joe's saying, take £1,000 fee off your clients to stop tire kickers and time wasters. Right, let me actually find a more serious question before we wrap up. So I'll get this one up on screen. I can't see all of it. So this is Jamie on YouTube. You want to read this one?
Yeah. Hi, Saj. Great vlogs. As a first-time HMO purchaser, lenders are restricting right now. Can you recommend a solicitor who's experienced structuring seller financing / potential partnership contracts, etc.?
Jamie, yes. I mean, if you're a first-time HMO buyer, you will struggle with some aspects of the financing because the market's very limited. Just like I talked about earlier on, lenders really want to see experience. They see HMOs as being more tough than being a normal buy-to-let landlord, and they just want to see that you've got some experience and the whole thing's just not going to implode into a mess. So it's involving other people, and of course, depending on how you do it, can get quite costly. So when you start talking about shareholder agreements and different classes of shares, and getting the legal work set up for all of that, it can get quite complex and run into thousands of pounds of legal fees. So the whole thing all needs to have some balance and be have some context as well in terms of what you're trying to achieve as your end goal. So my suggestion would be to try and keep it really simple in terms of what you're trying to do. If you ping me a message on any of my social media platforms, what I'll do is I can suggest a solicitor you can speak to, and probably also an accountant first before speaking to the solicitor, because there's a number of things you need to consider. The solicitor can set up a structure for you, but you've got to make sure your lender is happy with that structure, which a solicitor may not be aware of, so you need to involve your broker. Then, of course, you could set it up in a way that seems to work, but it may not be tax efficient for you, so you need to involve the accountant. This is why the three, as I was saying earlier on, are important, that they're working together for you. They may not necessarily be speaking to each other, but you need to bring all the information together to make sure that the whole deal works in the way that you want it to work, and not by setting you up in one way. Yes, that works, but actually penalizes you from doing something else. So I hope that makes sense. So we're at 9 o'clock, so I just want to say thank you so much for all of those of you that have taken the time to spend your Monday evening half hour or so with me. I really appreciate you being here, because ultimately that's what drives me to do more of this, by sharing my knowledge and experience for people that want to listen and would like some help. So I'll be back here next Monday evening at 8:30. If you've got any other questions, put it in the comment section. I'll try and pick those up and start with those next week early, or you can PM me, private message me on any of my social media platforms. That's Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram. We're still working on TikTok. We haven't quite mastered that just yet. So just reach out to me. I'll be more than happy to help. I'm hoping in September we should be able to start our live events again, and we'll get our monthly property meet back up and running, which would be awesome, because I'd really love to meet some of you face to face. So thank you once again so much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you next Monday at 8:30 p.m.